Hi there. I wanted to clarify the difference between a lay witness and an expert witness. So I'm going to walk you through the federal rules of evidence, and hopefully this will clarify a lot of your comments and questions. And thank you for sending them. And I'm sorry I don't have enough time to give an extensive video here, but I just wanted to explain the difference between what a lay witness is and an expert witness. It's not based on credentials, right? It's based on, according to Elizabeth Holmes in her appeal, one of the reasons she's challenging her convictions, and she is supported by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who are also have a concern about the expert witness testimony, the alleged expert witness testimony of Dr. Doss. So I got a couple comments from you, and I wanted to talk about three in particular. One, Blushing Foreigner, I appreciate your passionate analysis. Thank you so much in your comment. She says that Dr. Doss was a layperson, an eyewitness, not an expert. And why isn't Holmes contesting that Dr. Rosendorf was an expert? Is it because of the credentials? And then one guitar commented, you don't have to sell DNA evidence because there's science behind that. Jay Randy commented that Dr. Doss testified as a former employee there, you can infer expertise. Okay, so I appreciate all those comments, but I wanted to clarify a little bit here. It's not a witness doesn't become an expert because of credentials or because they have they worked in the lab. They become an expert when we look at Rule 702 here, is when a witness who is qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, and experience, training, and education may testify in the form of an opinion if the expert's scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge will help the trier of fact, that would be the jury, to understand the evidence or to determine a fact and issue, whether or not there was fraud, whether or not there's misrepresentation. The testimony is based on sufficient facts and data or data. The testimony is the product of reliable principles and methods, and the expert has reliably applied the principles and methods to the facts of the case. Okay, now let me read you lay witness, and then I will explain how this all comes together. So, opinion testimony by a lay witness. If a witness is not testifying as an expert, which is what the prosecutions and what the court found, that Dr. Doss was a lay witness at the time he testified. If a witness is not testifying as an expert, testimony in the form of an opinion is limited to one that is rationally based on the witness's perception. In other words, what Dr. Rosendorf, what Erica Chung, and what Ms. Gangakar testified when they took the stand about their observations of the Edison, of the technology, of the analyzers in the lab. They gave their testimony based on their observation. They testified as a lay witness. And it was not based on scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge. So Dr. Doss did two analyses of the analyzer. One, he did what's called a Six Sigma analysis, which the court did not allow him to testify to because the court determined that that was expert testimony, that was scientific, that was technical. But Dr. Doss did testify in the trial as to the patient impact assessment. So let me show that to you. This is from the appeal filed by Elizabeth Holmes. The government called Doss without requesting a Daubert hearing. So what happened initially was the prosecution was going to call a different expert witness, Stephen Masters. the court determined that if he's going to be testifying, they needed to do a Daubert hearing before he testified, and that would allow the court and the parties to inquire to find out whether Masters or whether an expert had the credentials, what his opinion was, what it was based on. Okay. And then before Dr. Doss took the stand, Holmes challenged the admissibility of Dr. Doss's expert opinions and patient impact assessment. The court deferred its ruling. So in other words, the court didn't determine whether or not the court would allow Dr. Doss to give the expert opinion and the patient impact assessment testimony. So then Doss takes the stand over Elizabeth Holmes objecting. Okay, the court permitted questioning about, here's where it is. The court permitted questioning about and admitted the patient impact assessment over Holmes's Rule 702 objection. She was objecting that Doss was now testifying as an expert, and it was inadmissible testimony because they claim that the court did not, or I should say the prosecution did not fulfill the requirements that you have to meet when you call an expert witness. You have to provide the basis of their opinion, a summary of their opinion. Okay, so Doss explained that he performed, so this is the second analysis. The Six Sigma analysis was not allowed in as testimony, but he was allowed to testify. Doss was allowed to testify that he performed patient impact assessments using, and here's where the basis of his opinion is, using validation reports, quality control results, and patient test result distributions and calculations. He did a retrospective analysis. So, assuming he's in the lab, he's doing an analysis based on the quality control, the validation reports, the patient test result distribution and calculation. He's looking at what occurred in 2014 and 2015. Why? Because that's the time period of the indictment of when these frauds occurred. So Dr. Doss came on in 2016 as the lab director. He's now making a patient impact assessment, an analysis of the technology, looking at what occurred in 2014 and 2015 based on the quality control data. As a result of the assessment, here's where his opinion comes in. As a result of the assessment, he explained that the laboratory concluded there was a possible patient impact for every test reported, and that he never resumed the testing on the Edison devices because he found them unsuitable for clinical use. In other words, that the technology wasn't working accurately, right? And he recommended to Elizabeth Holmes that she void those test results. Okay, so it's not about his credentials. It's about, did he testify? Did he give an opinion? And his opinion basically was unsuitable for clinical use. In other words, the technology didn't work. What was that opinion based on? Validation reports, quality control, patient test distributions, and calculations. That's what Elizabeth Holmes is claiming made him an expert, because he talked about, he did another analysis. It wasn't part of his job, which is the prosecution is saying he was hired to do the job. He did the job that he was hired to do. Yes, he was hired to come in and be the lab director. CMS had done their audit, had found deficiencies in the Normandy lab, right? And then eventually Theranos lost, had to close down because of these deficiencies. So Dr. Doss was hired to come in and basically do cleanup work to reform the lab, to get it in compliance with CMS, with the regulatory compliance. So it's going to be an argument here whether his assessment of the patient impact assessment, this other analysis that he did, doing a retrospective analysis, amounts to expert witness testimony, or was it part of his job. And according to the brief by Elizabeth Holmes, there is case law to support, even if, in the Ninth Circuit, by the way, even if his testimony is based on, what had occurred as part of his job, if he's giving additional testimony in the form of expert witness, in other words, just being part of your job is not enough if you're giving additional analysis or additional expert witness testimony. So going back to the federal rules of evidence here, did Doss give scientific, technical, or specialized knowledge? Well, maybe it could be argued doing that additional assessment, that retroactive assessment of the patient impact assessment, where he looked at validation reports, quality control data from 2014 and 2015, whether that was the basis of his opinion to say that the technology did not work. So looking at B here, the testimony is based on sufficient facts or data. Elizabeth Holmes is arguing, and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers are saying, how is the testimony that Dr. Doss gave based on sufficient facts or data when the data is missing? Because Elizabeth Holmes was not provided with these validation reports, the quality control reports, etc., all the information that Dr. Doss relied upon when he did that retroactive analysis from 2014 and 2015. He comes into the lab in 2016. He takes a look back. He looks at data from 2014 and 2015, which is not provided to Elizabeth Holmes because it's missing. Dr. Doss said he did not have those reports, all that data, which did include some of the data from the LIS database. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. I hope I was able to explain this. And maybe I can give you another analogy here. Say, for example, the 4 people that testified regarding the technology. One was Dr. Doss, which Elizabeth Holmes is claiming is an expert. He testifies as an expert. And there's missing data. Therefore, you need to throw out his testimony because she was not allowed due process because the missing data was never provided. But the other 3 people that testified in trial were Adam Rosendorf, Dr. Rosendorf, Erica Chung, and Miss Gangatar. Those 3 witnesses testified as lay witness to what they observed in the lab. They noticed that, I think it was Erica Chung said that there were 5 test results that were inaccurate, or that there were additional inaccuracies with the analyzer. But the only one who came in with a comprehensive analysis was Dr. Doss, and that's when he did the Six Sigma analysis and the patient impact analysis assessment, which is the latter is what came in the trial. So let me give you another analogy here. Let's take a case where an automobile company, a car company, gets sued by the plaintiff who was injured in a car accident because of faulty brakes. And let's say that car was driven by Dr. Rosendorf, Erica Chung, and Ms. Gangatar, and Dr. Doss. And the question at trial is whether or not those brakes work, whether or not they were faulty brakes or not. And I know this isn't an exact analogy, but I just am using this to try to help explain the difference between a lay witness and an expert witness. So Dr. Rosendorf, Erica Chung, and Ms. Gangatar all testified that they had driven the car independently, and they had noticed there were issues with the brakes. But then it was Dr. Doss who got in the car, drove it around, noticed there were some issues, did a Six Sigma analysis of the brakes, and did an assessment of the brakes. And based on how the mechanics reports were regarding the brakes in the past, that that it had passed tests or had issues with it, Dr. Doss came into court and said Well, based on his analysis, he looked at the prior reports from the mechanic relating to the brakes. He tested out the brakes, and it was his opinion that the brakes were faulty. He's the expert witness, where Rosendorf, Erica Chung, and Ms. Gangatar are the lay witnesses. So I hope that explains this. And again, Elizabeth Holmes is claiming that Dr. Doss's testimony, his opinion, all the information he gave regarding his patient impact assessment, the validation reports, quality control, etc., all of that was data that he relied upon to give the opinion as an expert, Elizabeth Holmes is claiming, and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who are also supporting her conviction be overturned or be reversed, I should say. They're claiming that that amounts to expert witness testimony. And because Elizabeth Holmes wasn't able to sufficiently challenge or to look at the sufficient data that was the basis of this opinion, those quality control reports of validation, all of that from records from 2014 to 2015, that her conviction should be thrown out. Okay, so I hope this is helpful, and please leave me comments or additional questions you have, but I thought it would be helpful for you to read this yourself and to just it's not about whether or not Dr. Doss had credentials or whether or not Dr. Doss was an employee at Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes is claiming it's because he testified as an expert witness because he did an assessment or an analysis based on a retroactive analysis of reports from 2014 and 2015 regarding the analyzer. And it's not because he's a doctor or has credentials, it's because he gave an opinion. And he stated the basis of the opinion were these reports, which Elizabeth Holmes claims is basically missing data because she was never allowed, she was never given those reports, the validation reports or the quality control reports. Okay, so I don't want to keep repeating myself here. Hopefully that clarifies it. And you can go ahead and read these two sections for yourself and leave a comment or question. And thanks again for subscribing to Michele's analysis. I appreciate your support. I swear it feels like it's Friday. And if you want to share these videos, please do hit that like button, give me the thumbs up. And if you want to support me making these videos, I'll put a PayPal link in the description box below the video. Okay, so this appeal may turn on whether or not Dr. Doss was an expert witness when he testified, because if he was an expert witness, then the prosecution was, there may have been an error here on whether or not the prosecution should have disclosed him earlier, should have given the basis for his opinion more than that 4-sentence email that they sent weeks before trial, and whether or not Elizabeth Holmes should have been provided with the so-called missing data, which were those validation, the quality control reports, some possibly the missing LIS database, etc. Okay, so hopefully this clarifies, and thanks again for listening. Thanks again for subscribing. Please do subscribe to support my work. And stay tuned. You never know what's going to happen next in this case. Thanks again for watching.